Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, April 7th, 2025. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Well, we have nothing to talk about, so I guess we'll be back. We'll be back tomorrow with another fun episode of The World is Coming to an End. Okay, maybe the world is not coming to an end. I don't know if the world is coming to an end. It's 8 o'clock in the morning.
Should we rechristen the podcast the Daily Meltdown?
Well, it's not my meltdown. I gotta say, I fully emotionally prepared for what happened here.
Good.
Myself, I do think that it is very interesting that as we are having this conversation, it is 8 a.m. Monday morning. So we don't know how the markets are going to open in light of what happened over the weekend and in light of things that Donald Trump said last night on Air Force One and in light of appearances on the Sunday shows. We don't know whether there is going to be a continued meltdown. There was a 10 to 12% correction since Trump announced I don't even think we should call them tariffs because it's a tariff imposition, the purpose of which is to end trade deficits, apparently. And I don't know if that means that the tariffs are for the purpose of levying imposts on other goods, or if they're actually to create a worldwide condition under which, according to what Trump said last night on Air Force One, we don't have any kind of balance of payments issue with any other country that is not in our favor. So is that a tariff, or is it some kind of dream of a world in which you don't even have to pay for goods somehow? If you pay for goods, you get goods back in larger quantities than the ones that you paid for. You don't pay for them at all. Anyway, Matt Continetti.
Yeah. Well, I have some observations. First, the markets are about to open. Mixed messages over the weekend. Clearly, the president isn't interested in negotiating. On the other hand, he did advance to the next round of the senior championship at one of his golf clubs. So it's possible that the market may take some relief at that. That is, the swing is still good.
According to him, he won. I don't know if you know if he won. He won. He literally said, "I won 5 times."
Yeah,
that he won. So
maybe that will put him in a good mood. He didn't seem like a very good mood in the press availability, though, on the way back. He told a reporter to move out of the frame, kind of gruffly. And then he told another reporter that it was a very stupid question when asked if, he was satisfied with the way markets have been performing. President Trump said, of course, he doesn't like that they're going down. But once again, he likened what he has done to a medical procedure. An operation. Other times he's been using the metaphor of medicine, that these policies, the Trump shock, Liberation Day, are meant to somehow cure what is ailing the American economy. And I think it's a mistake for people to assume that he is going to come out today after meeting Prime Minister Netanyahu this afternoon and say, well, Israel's promised to drop its tariffs on U.S. goods, so we're going to drop all our tariffs on Israeli goods. I think Israel got slapped with the 17% tariff that will go into effect on Wednesday. I think he feels as though this is necessary in order to change the global economy in a way that transforms the American domestic economy toward one based more on high-skilled manufacturing and export. Now, there are a few assumptions, of course, in that argument that I disagree with. One, the idea that the American economy is fundamentally ailing, as we've discussed many times before on this podcast, to the degree that middle America has been hurt by changes in the global economy over the past 2 decades. I happen to believe the cure is better regulatory policy, better tax policy, better workforce policy, better educational policy. All of these are interconnected. And then there's the other assumption built in there that Howard Lutnick, our Commerce Secretary, who's emerging as Trump's Trump in this second term, put out over the weekend in his appearances on the talk shows, which is somehow the high-tech, high-skilled manufacturing export economy is a better model than the current model that we have, where America is an exporter of services, right? But does have trade deficits in manufacturing goods with other countries. I think we've seen the limits of the export-based economic model when you look at the pathologies of the German economy,
Japan,
even China.
Japan has been fundamentally stagnant, with an economy built almost entirely on exports for more than 30 years.
Right.
I mean, it's the world's second or third largest economy, depending on how you measure it. So it's not as though it hasn't suffered, but there was a point at which Japan, much smaller than us or than China, was possibly in the position of overtaking us as the world's leading economy had it stopped its top-down distortions relating to forcing the country to be an export economy. So we actually have a real world example of a country that has done itself long-term damage with this. Now cultural reasons are largely responsible for that in Japan's case that do not exist here. But nonetheless, it's not like we can't say, well, no one's ever tried what Trump's trying before, so we got to give it a shot.
No, and Germany, of course, I think is also an example that it's very clear what's happened to the German economy. Also, not just because they're so heavy on export industry, but also because of their environmental policies, which has effectively deindustrialized Germany. And of course, Trump does not share those environmental policies. I'll just finally, if those assumptions are flawed, in my view, what's happening here? Well, I think what's happening here is politics. And it's not about wealth accumulation. It's about wealth distribution. And the Trump voter, the voters in the heartland of America, the forgotten Americans who have been the base of the Trump coalition now for a decade, they have consistently been much more economically nationalist than us, than the people in the bubble, the people in the Acela corridor. I just saw a map on Axios of the distribution of AI data centers across the country. The Acela corridor is huge. I mean, China, Russia, if you're listening, just look at that Axios map, right? You see the distribution of power and wealth in this country. And the voters who have lost out from this change over time are the Trump voters. And I've been reading interviews with them throughout the weekend. And they're like, well, they too would prefer things not to go down, but they'll say that, it's been too long. We need to assert ourselves. We need the factories back. They seem to be holding with Trump. And this is why. Just to close. Among my reading this weekend was an essay by the Marxist historian Perry Anderson in the London Review of Books. And I would recommend this essay if you have 45 minutes. Perry Anderson likes to write lengthy essays. And he's analyzing, as he always does, the state of things. And he says, basically, there are three keys to populism. One is an attack on inequality. The second is an attack on plutocracy or oligarchy, whatever fashionable phrase you want to use. And the third is an attack on factor production. That is trade, free trade, immigration, global capital flows. And when I'm reading this essay, I say, well, here's Trump too. He's attacking all three. And it is much more populist than Trump 1. And we really don't know what will happen in the long run because this has never been tried before.
So just to respond, so you're saying the Trump voter is hanging with him.
Yeah.
So Trump got 77 million votes.
The base voter.
Right. That's
base voter. Importantly, as John Murdoch pointed out in the FT, the Republican voters who, are kind of pre-Trump voters who are still part of that coalition, the Nikki Haley, people who like Nikki Haley, that type, the people who like Mike Pence, traditional Republican voters, they are beginning to have severe indigestion, if not departing, supporting Trump, full stop.
But that's why I bring this up, because he got 77 million votes. He did not get 40 million votes. And yes, he won the swing states, and among the swing states are states of the forgotten man of the Midwest. But not only. Those are not the only swing states he won, because Georgia was one of the swing states he won, and Arizona was another one of the swing states he won, and Florida. And
I guess Florida's not a swing state anymore,
right?
But yeah,
but they are not part of this model. And not only is it 77 million voters, so we know that the MAGA base supposedly makes up 30 to 40% of the Republican vote. Like, if, in other words, the people who would shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, if he asked them to, right? So that's a huge number of people. It's the largest, probably right now, the largest single factor in American politics as a grouping, let's say, aside from, say, evangelical Christians, something like that. So I'm not discounting the deep importance of the Trump base, but he is not a candidate in a congressional district or even in a red state. He is the president of the United States. He received votes from way many more people than are just forgotten over the 21st century and dealing with problems like fentanyl and family problems and educational issues and all of that. He is the Republican. He is the president of the United States, and he was the candidate of the Republican Party. And Scott Bessent, his Treasury Secretary, who was a hedge fund guy, said the other day, hey, look, like 48% of the stock market, or 40%, is owned by the top 2% of people. And then another 40% is owned by the top 20% of people. And then you have other people. And so we're basically not doing what we're doing for them. That's 160 million people that Scott Bessent was waving away with a flick of his wrist at the idea that it matters if the market goes down 4,000 points in 2 days. And he said, and most people aren't checking their 401ks to see where they are. Oh, really? So retirees in the United States who literally live on their 401ks aren't watching the value of their 401ks drop by 10 to 12% and aren't watching it, since that is the sole sum, aside from Social Security, of their income. This is why rich people spent a century learning how to talk about money in a way that would not cause pitchforks to be brought to their hedgerows and have their houses set on fire. And Bessent and Trump, to some degree, and Lutnick and others are reigniting what I would call leftist populism in response to them. They are sounding clueless. They are sounding heartless. They are sounding like when Bill Clinton in 1993 said, we're going to raise taxes. This is in the spring of 93, because to oppose that is to be unpatriotic. To oppose having your taxes increased is to be unpatriotic. That was one of those marker moments, when you knew that Clinton did not have a proper connection with the American people. And so, yes, there is a huge populist thing going on here, but the nation is not populist. Part of the Republican coalition is populist. It's not even necessarily a majority. What he has is huge support among Republicans who have been happy with him thus far. We'll see where that number is in July if things don't change.
Well, but my favorite.
Go ahead.
I just would add the most flabbergasting bit of sophistry that I heard over the weekend came from Kevin Hassett, the director of the National Economic Council, where he went on TV and he said, "Look, if American consumers are paying the price of this, then why are foreign countries retaliating? Because they know that we're not paying we're not paying for this, they are. And that's why they're retaliating," which is like saying, if you walk up to someone and punch them in the face, there's no risk to you. The other person knows that. That's why they're punching you back in the face, because you're safe.
Well, he also confused the messaging in a way that I think is also leading to lots of volatility in the market response and in the public response by saying, well, we have 50 countries are on the phone ready to negotiate, which undercuts this idea. And Trump himself was promoting this over the weekend, that this is an economic revolution. He used the word revolution. And the idea that our populist revolutionary, woe betide the country that has a leader who in pushing age 80 suddenly becomes a revolutionary. You know, he was hosting $1 million a plate fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago and golfing. Well, he sent out his minions to television to give several different messages, right? It's either an economic revolution to bring manufacturing back to this country and transform our economy and help all those people, as Matt said, in the sort of forgotten men and women of the country who were left behind in a globalized economy. It's either that or it's a negotiating tactic, as seemed to be during his first term. But and then you've got Elon Musk posting videos of Milton Friedman arguing that tariffs are a bad idea. So it's not even clear to me what Trump himself thinks. He does shift day to day. And I'll be very curious to see if those voters you're talking about, John, the ones who hung with him this time around but aren't his hardcore base, whether they really wanted and voted for an economic revolution. I'm skeptical that they did.
Well, first, Trump is a second-term president. And like all second-term presidents, he views his second term as his chance to enact his vision of the world, even if that means
it's legacy time,
that he misreads the mandate. We should also say, though, that, you know, throughout the campaign, when Trump was talking about 60% tariff on China, everyone said to themselves, oh, he doesn't really mean it. It's like he's going to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Well, the average effective tariff on China on Wednesday, once this latest round comes in, is approaching 60%. So he gave everybody advance warning that this was going to happen. It's just that people, especially in parts of his coalition on Wall Street, did not take him very seriously. And then I think that's the point that you raised, Christine, that's worth expanding on.
They took him seriously, but not literally. And you're saying they should have taken him literally.
This was the time. This was the time
to reverse Selena Guido's formula,
to take him seriously on
literally
trade. Because as we know, this is like the one fixed principle he's had for the last 40 years, right? But what Christine raises is important, is that, and that is, this is the first time really in the Trump era where we can see visible strains within the MAGA coalition. I would say that whether it's Doge, the border, the anti-woke campaign, there is very little argument among Republicans. There is a lot of caterwauling from Democrats and the left.
Right. The only argument, right, and we can get to this later. I mean, the only argument which is substantive and complicated in terms of the overall Republican coalition are some of these due process questions relating to the deportations and things like that. But only on the matter of constitutional principle, not even on the matter of whether or not we should be throwing out terrorist supporters to the extent that we can do so, because we need to dot our I's and cross our T's.
Sure,
That's
and
the only area aside.
Yeah, and even there, the criticism's more intellectual than it is from the elected officials. This is different. The Trump shock is very different, and so you have seen senators and representatives react to it in ways that that are different for the Trump era, right? It's not necessarily outright opposition, though there are cases like that. There's also a general stance where Republicans say, we just don't know how it's going to happen, or we just trust Trump. It's a gamble. It's a gamble. I was very interested to see on Friday Senator Ted Cruz, someone who is probably thinking of future presidential campaigns in the back of his head, say that, he's against tariffs. He would prefer that we have zero tariffs. We'll see how this works out, right? Over the weekend, as you say, Christine, Elon Musk taking shots at Peter Navarro and at Howard Lutnick, the two most protectionist members of the Trump inner circle. And so you saw also figures like Bill Ackman come out over the weekend saying that Trump should announce a 90-day pause on the Liberation Day tariffs in order to provide the markets reassurance. So this is the real issue here, is that depending on how this goes, the Trump coalition could begin to snap. And I don't know, will it? I don't know if Trump's going to back off. It doesn't seem like he's going to back off, but that's what I'm focused on, because this issue in particular, the trade issue, is the one that seems to have the most variance in how Republicans react.
Okay, I want to talk about the red pilling effect, because I think Bill Ackman, Pershing Square hedge fund guy, very interesting example of this. He came to the right not through cultural issues. I mean, his red pilling over the course of the last 2 years, largely the result of October 7th and his fight with Penn and his disgust at his university for its behavior and all of that. And as red pilling happens, it is as though once one domino falls in the world of conventional opinion, you start saying, what other forms of the conventional opinion that I have simply accepted, because it's not really my field and I don't pay that much attention to it, what other forms of it am I now seeing? What other nonsense have I been peddled? And you could see this over the course of 2024, when a lot of people who were anti-Trump, but not like hostile to Republican or whatever, but sort of like started saying, yeah, and you know what else? Trans is bad. You know what else? And you know what else? This is all of which you, as Matt, you say, is the binding glue of the Trump coalition in 2025. The stuff where it's like, you all went crazy. Liberals went nuts. They started saying that men are men and women are men are women and women are men. And our educational system is terrible. And people are supporting terrorism. And what is it with these open borders and all of that, right? So total red pilling, to the extent that people then were even like, and there's all sorts of interesting things going on with maybe we do need to have some rebalancing in trade. Maybe, China's bad and they're threatening Taiwan. Tariffs on China were actually pretty good in 2017 because we needed to do something to stop them. So let's see where this goes. This is why red pilling is a bad phenomenon politically in this sense, or why it is intellectually bad. Because yes, while I believe that there is a consistency in issues across, that's what ideologies are, is they try to explain things in various realms with intellectual consistency that ties together ideas about freedom or government or whatever, and explains how they function in economics, how they function in foreign policy, how they function in social policy. But if they're tied to a person, then the problem is the red pilling is, yeah, I like what he's doing on trans. I like what he's doing on education. I like that he's, activating Title VI. I like this. I like that. Wait a minute. Now, this is something I know about, and this is crazy. Could we get a pause? Because, I really liked where all this was going. And I only bring this up to say that the proper response to Donald Trump as a political phenomenon from 2015 onward was to remain emotionally, to the extent possible, if you wanted to be an intellectually serious, to remain emotionally detached from him. Because the hilarity of when Christine said he's an 80-year-old man, he's not quite 80, but he's like an 80-year-old man who's a revolutionary, is everybody who has dealt with Trump for the last 40 years that I have known, I'm talking businessmen, lawyers, everybody else, says that the key to understanding him is that he thinks in terms of the next 5 minutes. If he's testifying in a deposition and you ask him a question, he'll answer the question that will get him through the next 5 minutes. Not, oh my God, I really have to answer this correctly so that 2 years from now, someone can't bring up my answer in this deposition and say, well, you're totally contradicting what you said 18 months ago, and therefore, I'm going to find against you. He does what is the next thing in front of him to get him through the next 5 minutes. And now he is advancing and embarking on a 10 to 20 year strategy of rebalancing the entire planet's economy. This is not his field. This is not in his wheelhouse. This is not who he is.
I agree about the next 5 minute thing, but the one difference may have been the assassination attempt. And people who have been around him since the assassination attempt have said that his manner changed. And I think the public saw that a little bit in the aftermath of it, especially during the Republican convention, which happened the following week. And of course, he's now said repeatedly that he believes his life was spared by God in order to make America great again. And of course, that made Hillary Clinton laugh, or Pelosi, it made Pelosi laugh. Gulf of America made Clinton laugh at the inaugural, but the line about Providence made Pelosi laugh at the budget speech. But if he believes it, it does mean that he is taking a different tack. That he is going to follow through with this to see. You know, there's a lot of alarm here. Obviously, the stock market not doing well. More interestingly, the fact that yields are falling, bond yields are falling, and the dollar is falling, suggests that the market thinks that there's slow growth ahead, that there's a recession ahead. And the politics of recession are interesting. Trump had to deal with the pandemic recession, and of course that we began recovering from right around the time of the election.
No, but during his presidency, in other words, there was one bad quarter, right, when the economy literally shrank by 34%, and then of course it grew by 15%.
And then it grew by, exactly,
the next quarter because the base had shrunk. Because that was an exogenous.
So here's my thinking about what the White House political office might be thinking, and that is, this economy was completely unbalanced. Not sure. The MAGA believes it was unbalanced for decades because of China and global trade. But Scott Bessent thinks it's overbalanced because there's too much debt, there's too much regulation. Biden inflated the economy through his huge spending bills. Huge growth in government employees, not the private sector. Let's have the recession now. Let's have the recession in the first year of the second term, because a year from now, when things have finally hit bottom and are recovering, Republicans can go into 2026 and saying the Trump policy worked. Now, I know as I say this, plenty of people listening to this podcast or watching will say, that's crazy, you're stupid. But remember, this is not the end. Time progresses forward, and there presidents who are considered lucky tend to have the recession at the beginning of their term rather than during an election year.
But I think you could argue if that's a strategy, at least it's a strategy that makes some long-term sense. The challenge, however, is that if they get the timing wrong, or if the recession is quite severe, this will have been a self-inflicted policy wound that they brought on themselves, because the economy otherwise might have been recovering. Inflation was going down. There were some signs that things were improving, although slowly. So in that sense, I think it's why we haven't heard a lot from Bernie Sanders recently, who loves the tariffs in the way that Trump is using them. I mean, the horseshoe theory of this economic argument they're making is fascinating to me, because it is quite radical. It is not the way America has done business as an economic powerhouse. So it's maybe it'll work. It is a huge gamble, but it is a very revolutionary way of understanding the economy. And it is also placing a great deal it's making many assumptions, I should say, about the American worker. Was it Besant? It's the one who looks sort of like a grown-up Teddy Ruxpin doll. I think it's Besant.
Yeah.
When he was on one of the shows, he was saying, or maybe it was Lutnick. They were saying, well, we're going to have an army of HVAC engineers. We're going to have all these
Lutnick.
People.
That was
Lutnick.
Yeah.
Okay. So, the people, we will be the ones with the teeny tiny screwdrivers making the iPhones.
Well, but then he changed, what he said. You're absolutely right. He starts out by saying, we're going to have the millions of people screwing in bolts into iPhone. And when he said that, I was like,
what?
Do you want that? But then he immediately changed. He had amended it by saying, "No, robots are going to do that.
Right. That's
We're going to have the high skill.
The robots.
We're going to
Right.
fix high skill manufacturing.
Right.
We will service the robots. That's the American.
Well, that takes skills.
Someone's
right?
got to fix the robots. We need to
Right.
train. This is Dan
Right.
Quayle became vice president of the United States in the late 80s because he was a job retraining person. That was the first effort by Washington to deal with the phenomenon of the hollowing out of the manufacturing sector. Was, we need to do is have a giant national program to train people in new kinds of work, if the work that they're having is going away. And that did make Dan Quayle's career, because he passed a piece of legislation as a young senator. Didn't work out very well, because top-down things like job retraining from the federal level, even if it's block granted, is nonsense. That's not, people get jobs and then they train on the job to learn how to do their job. And this is some kind of weird national effort to make everybody into a robotics repairman, like, according to Howard Lutnick.
I've long been a fan of the idea that too many people go to college, and we need to have a more robust apprentice and trade option and path, particularly for young men in this country who don't want to go to college and would rather learn a trade. That is a good thing, and the government actually could do some things to support that.
Sure,
but that's a very different role than
but they do it through deregulation,
right? Exactly,
in a lot of ways. But
can I say something about this idea about, if they front load the recession and then it's over, and then let's say this plan works exactly as Trump has envisioned, right? We're still in a different world after this. It's a much less friendly world.
Yeah,
in terms of
more expensive coffee.
But in terms of international cooperation on all sorts of issues,
the geopolitics of this has been ignored. We should probably talk a little bit about that.
I want to just put this in the final context, and then we should talk about specific issues and what's going on here. But there has been for the last 5 days a kind of moment that I have likened to Carrie Fisher running into John Belushi with her machine gun in this tunnel in the Blues Brothers, where he has left her at the altar and she has finally found him and is going to gun him down. And John Belushi, looking at her, says, "My mother got sick. The dog ate the homework. My car had a flat tire. There was a rainstorm. The bridge was out." He just throws out 25 different explanations. And then finally she says, oh, Jake, honey. And then he I can't remember, he punches her or something and runs away, right? So this week we have seen, like tariffs? What we're actually doing is we're rebalancing the world economy against trade deficits. You don't like to hear about trade deficits? What we're really doing is we're going to refinance. We're going to cause a breakdown in the bond market. The bond market is going to crash. We're going to refinance our national debt at a lower level, and therefore we're going to be able to pay off our national debt or significantly reduce our debt load. That's actually why we're doing it. We're doing it. We're trying to get the recession in the first year. So to get the recession out of the way to help Republicans. You know what else might be helpful? You know what it is? We're trying to do that. It's like, you don't like this explanation for this completely what appears to be deranged unilateral policy that has come out of nowhere without any trigger? I got one for you. I'll try it out on you. What the hell? There are 17 Fox shows. We could each go, every one of us can go on a different Fox show and throw out a different explanation. We're doing it because Trump wants it to be done. And we are ex post facto trying to come up with explanations, all of which track with ideas about the US and world economies over the last 30 years. A lot of those ideas are totally anathematic to everything that made the distinction between left and right possible in the world of economics, like, supply and demand and things like comparative advantage and other ideas. I mean, the ultimate. Okay, so I'm just saying, there is a disingenuousness to the way this has been treated, where it's impossible to know, is Bessent telling the truth about maybe he wants a recession, but Lutnick wants us to be screwing in iPhones. And Trump said on Air Force One last night, he doesn't want us to have a trade deficit with any other country.
Right.
What do you mean? If I want to buy, if I'm in France and I want to buy a cafe au lait in France because I'm visiting there and I spend 5 francs or €5 or whatever the hell it is on my cafe au lait, I'm then in trade deficit.
You've contributed to the trade deficit, John.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like,
no more trips to Paris for you.
Yeah. So, in my darkest suspicions, it is Trump is a guy who, like, hires people and then doesn't like to pay them and tries to do what he can as a businessman to not pay the people that he hires, his lawyers, people who work on his on the sort of like the gardening at his facilities and things like that. He tries to stiff people. This is like a 30-year, 40-year policy of his. And like, this is how he thinks about trade. It's like the ideal thing that you should do is get everything for free. And if you don't get things for free and you have to pay for them, then you're kind of being screwed by the person who is selling you the good that you want to buy.
I want to talk just briefly about the horseshoe thing, because this issue is not dividing the Republican Party alone. It's also dividing the Democratic Party. And I think that's important. And I think that there are many people in resistance land, when I pull out my telescope and I look over and observe them, who are angry that the Democrats are not more fulsomely protesting the protectionism and the tariffs. And the reason that the Democrats are a little bit a mixed bag here in their messaging is, as Christine says, many of them have been arguing for decades that global trade is imbalanced and has hurt American workers. And so something needs to be done. This is a policy, the roots of this policy go back really to the 1980s, and figures like Richard Gephardt coming out of the Midwest Democrat, labor-backed, about talking about American economic nationalism as a democratic issue. And here again, we see how the coalitions have shifted, where Trump is now adopted, as he's long adopted, the idea of economic nationalism and protection. We see that the UAW was there when on Liberation Day at the White House, and organized labor is kind of two minds in this, but they're not, vocally protesting the new policies. And you have figures like Bernie Sanders and Democrats from Pennsylvania, for example, who are like, well, maybe you're just going about it in the wrong way. This is another case where the confusion that the longtime Democratic pollster Mark Penn expressed to me recently, where he said, I woke up and somehow the Democratic Party has become the party of foreign wars, open borders, and free trade. And he's like, that's not supposed to be the Democratic Party. And so again, the economics of this are not good. They're not good.
19th century Democratic Party.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Right.
And the Republicans are going back. Yeah.
No tariffs because of the cotton trade.
Yes.
Right. Expansionist wars to Mexico and out into India in order to expand the number of slaves.
Southern markets. Yeah.
Anyway, Democratic Party.
We should mention it's also changed the tone of the organized resistance, which over the weekend staged lots of protests here in Washington and New York City and elsewhere, where I was struck by the contrast between first-term Trump, where they were all wearing their pussy hats and screaming about his personal behavior. Now they're waving their 401k statements and talking about tariffs and Doge. And I mean, it's a fascinating shift. Now, it wasn't as what the resistance will look like, because as Matt, you say correctly, it hasn't organized itself, and it's not even sure who is its leader right now, who is leading the Democratic Party's resistance, because they are fractured.
Okay, but that is a benefit to them. And this is where I think I may be in some disagreement with the two of you. So this weekend, most of this is obviously paid for as a kind of paid for political ad by the resistance, paid for by Progressive Insurance and George Soros and other people organizing people, getting them, paying them to show up in weird places like Carson City, Nevada, where there were 10,000 people, and Salt Lake City, and places you wouldn't ordinarily expect to have giant demonstrations against Donald Trump and all of that. The problem is that those resistance fights in 2017 were largely cultural in emphasis, right? And Trump may be handing the Democrats economics in a way that they have not had economics as in their wheelhouse, certainly not since the beginning of the pandemic, when Biden was so foolhardy in handling America's economy. But you could say, like, since 2008, They've been high-handed. They're very top-down regulatory. They seem not to be interested in jobs if the jobs are in areas that aren't green, so that when you have states like Pennsylvania and others that are having job booms over fracking or, or oil export or all of that, they're kind of like against it and all of this. And now if Trump, by deciding unilaterally to create a worldwide economic crisis, maybe for the purposes of a wondrous 22nd century in which America becomes, runs everything on all the planets in the solar system, that's really great. But you are good if your 401k goes down 25 points. And Trump, one of Trump's great benefits was the vote of people who are 55 and over, and you can start saying he's immiserating you. Like, you don't even need a resistance.
Yeah. I mean, the question is, a year from now, do people feel like they're poor because of Donald Trump?
Yeah. I mean, that's always the question, right?
It's always the question. Right. That was the question under Biden.
Right. And so the problem for Trump is that every piece of economic wisdom that I have learned in the course of my life and study, to the extent that I wasn't an economics major, but to the extent I studied economics, have read about it, have edited articles about all of this, is that what he is trying to do here isn't going to work.
Well, there's a corollary to my argument, and there's not just, are you feel poor next year, but it doesn't matter to Trump. It matters to me. It doesn't matter to Trump if Northern Virginia feels poor next year.
Okay.
So it
matters whether his voters feel poor.
Regarding the resistance, I don't think they're anywhere near there yet, though, on their message. I mean, what I saw.
No, it just started.
First of all, I don't think it's resistance. I think it's I think it's like a sort of tribute to the resistance, you know? And they were.
It's like Beatlemania. It's like
exactly. And they were out there with the no oligarchs signs and angry about laying off federal workers. Still a little bit of identity politics mixed in, talking about LGBTQ. So they're still against the issues where Trump has the 80 versus the 20.
Right. Well, that's true.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. I'm saying that what we could see here is something that is bigger than a resistance, that is way more helpful than a resistance, which is a macroeconomic phenomenon in which voters turn on Trump because for no reason that they can discern, he has introduced this note of crisis into the American economy. It's not like we got attacked on 9/11. It's not like the subprime mortgage collapsed. It's not like the dot-com bomb.
I like that, though.
I know. The dot-com bomb went off, and it's not like there were margin calls in 1987. He just did it on a Wednesday.
This is the cup of coffee problem, because this is what drove it home for me. I love coffee. The only state in the United States that can grow coffee is Hawaii. It's very expensive out there for a number of reasons. So most of the coffee you drink is imported from somewhere else. You cannot make American coffee great again. We can't make coffee here. It's not possible. Right. So the fact that the average American and most Americans drink coffee, their cup of coffee is going to cost more, whether they buy it themselves at Costco by the huge pounds of beans, or they go and get the fancy latte every day. At the cost of that every day, they will be drinking their coffee. And that's the message. If you're a Democrat, he did that. Right. It's that Biden sticker we saw on every gas pump for one summer. I mean,
yeah. So I'm just saying, like, that is a big thing. Like, he can't say even, and by the way, this then gets to a slightly secondary issue.
Oh, can I make one point about what your mass resistance, or how the public turns on, or how the Democrats can capitalize on this? I thought a very interesting moment. I don't know if it went viral or not. It was certainly in my Twitter feed, at my X feed. Happened last week. It was an exchange on the CNBC Late Show between the CNBC hosts and Derek Thompson of The Atlantic, who's a co-author of this new abundance book with Ezra Klein. And the thesis of the abundance progressives is that the Democratic Party has for too long believed in everything bagel liberalism, and has weighed down America through restrictions on supply, primarily restrictions on supply of energy and housing. And to this, the net effect of this has been lower growth, which is what we should care about, right? We should want higher growth. And so Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson are kind of leading this effort in order to move the Democrats toward abundance. Now, there are huge internal contradictions with this thesis, and I think the best critic of abundance liberalism or progressivism is our friend Reihan Salam, the president of the Manhattan Institute. But let's just imagine, if we put on our imagination caps here for a second, that over the next 2 years, the Trump shock creates the incentives for a widespread abundance progressivism movement. And someone emerges who takes on the Democratic Party, as successful nominees tend to do, on the basis of these ideas and argues for whether it's practical or not, a supply side oriented progressivism. Well, that could be dangerous to the Trump coalition. It could very well be dangerous to the Trump coalition. Do I see it happening? No.
One riposte to that, which is that you can see there's a historical analogy. So everybody blames Reagan. If you don't like what happened in the economy and supply side economics, it's Reagan, it's a fanatic, wanted to cut taxes, all of that. Supply side economics was an act of brazen intellectual theft by the right, because the original supply side tax cut was enacted by John F. Kennedy in the 1960s. And the material that was used to adduce the value of the supply side tax cut by Jude Winniski, whom Matt mentioned last week, and others, was the results of the supply side tax cut of the 1960s by the Kennedy administration. And the Democratic Party had progressed so far down the road away from the idea that cutting taxes could have a salutary effect, that it just sort of handed this issue lock, stock, and barrel to a party that had a whole bunch of other things going for it, including being in a better position on national security and law and order, but had not a very popular message on economics for most people. It was mostly like, we need to have low deficit, we need to cut deficits, we need to, green eye shade, like we're spending too much money and all of that. And that didn't answer how anybody was feeling about inflation or anything like that. You handed this issue. Abundance, in theory, is almost exactly this in reverse. That is, the Republican Party has been deregulatory, pro-energy, pro-doing things to make sure that housing codes are less onerous so that you can build more housing, anti-NIMBY, all of this stuff. And now you have Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson sort of taking up this mantle. You look at this book, a lot of people that I know look at it and are going, well, like, you guys are just plagiarists. Like, so either come to our side, or you can't just say Democrats are supporting this. They don't, because they're for all of these things.
But historically, this is actually something that's healthy in our system.
I agree.
About Bill Clinton doing welfare reform. he stole that idea, but you know what? We got welfare reform. So that's actually a sign of health.
Right.
Yeah.
The great moment, again, not to get too pop culture-y, great moment in Star Trek VI. Yes. Wow. Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, where Spock says to Kirk, we have to go negotiate with the Klingons. The Klingons are near death. It's the Glasnost perestroika thing. And Kirk says, what are you talking about? They murdered my son. Let them die. And Spock says, there is an old Vulcan saying, only Nixon can go to China. Right? Maybe the only way to get an abundance agenda is for a Democrat to propose it. But that would require the Democratic Party to be a much more flexible. Also, the big sword hadn't happened yet. We didn't have the two parties being as ideologically rigid in the 1970s as they have become, and they were regional. There were a lot of regional differences and places to exploit, and now we really do have these parties that, the cultural homogeneity of the Democratic Party is a very, very serious thing.
And abundance also requires the Democrats to downplay culture,
right,
and focus on economics. And if there's one lesson from our current era, it's that culture is privileged above economics. Right? Our politics are fundamentally, in my view, cultural politics.
Right.
And so perhaps the Trump shock will create a situation where economics is privileged once more over culture.
Mhm.
And then you need a Democrat to emerge who embraces abundance. There are a lot of ifs in this
Yeah.
argument. I'm saying it is one possible future that
Sure.
that would be, salutary in my view, because I am a supply sider. I want us to increase the supply of goods and services.
And we want America to not to be intellectually stagnant. I mean, that's
Oh,
also
right.
that which goes to the other problems with this. One of the things that was exciting about Trump coming in was this embrace of ideas that have been marinating on the right about how to combat the ideological domination of the higher the higher waters or the higher points of our culture, from the academy to the culture to library, whatever, and that this didn't come out of nowhere, and that this is something that we have been fighting for. What nobody has been fighting for outside of a very weird ideological point on the map that is this horseshoe point is we need to be in a worldwide trade war to help us for so that by 2050 we'll be in much better shape. Now, Abe, this gets to where we want to come back to you and the question of the world after last Wednesday and what we're hearing. Now, it is only 5 days and things can change and all of that. But something happened, and what do you think the manifestations of it are?
Well, I mean, I think much like Trump's his approach to Ukraine and NATO here, but this is, I think, much larger scale. The sort of intertwined nature of the world order that the U.S. has shepherded, over the past Cold War decades, will be no more. It's not going to be the same, regardless of whatever works out or doesn't work out in terms of the trade deficits and leveling the playing field, or whatever. We are going to be a much more isolated country. Countries that were considered allies will be much more inclined, I think, to work with countries that we've considered enemies. You see some of that already in the Pacific. It's going to be a more hostile world because of this.
An interesting, short, brilliant, not surprisingly brilliant little essay written by Matt's and Christine's colleague at AEI and one of my oldest and dearest friends, Nick Eberstadt, author of the most popular piece that we've ever published in Commentary, Our Miserable 21st Century, a person who is not averse to saying that, the economy of America in the 21st century has had very deleterious consequences on the American people and for a lot of people in the United States, as he wrote in that piece, has a short essay on the AEI website about America's national suicide attempt. And it's interesting because in theory, Nick could have gone another way. He could have gone our things are so bad and so parlous here that what we need to do is, as Victor Davis Hanson is arguing this morning in the Free Press, we need to go to war with the rest of the world. There's for 50 years, we have been holding the world on our shoulders like Atlas, and this is unsustainable, and we should not have to bear this burden. And that is not what Nick says. What he says is we've painstakingly over time built a post-war order that is flawed though it may be, that has made possible sort of economic growth and retaining America's primacy while helping a lot of other countries and knitting the world into a series of obligations and relationships. And we're just throwing it out, with the bathwater, and it's a national suicide attempt. And I think it's very striking because, as I say, Nick as an example of a thinker, there are ways in which you could have seen this go a different direction. But if you've been alive for 70 years on this planet or however long and been through the 70s through the 2020s, and had some sense of scale and scope. Trump's idea that the world has screwed us is very tempting, right? The truth is that we've screwed ourselves. And that's, I think, the ultimate thing that binds the right, which is the screwing that has gone on that he diagnosed in our miserable 21st century is a result of internal American flaws. How we've dealt with our education system, how we've dealt with income inequality, how we don't view economic growth as so paramount to help the sort of the lowest quintile, that we don't place onerous regulatory restrictions in ways that make it impossible for people like that to get a leg up and to make money and to build houses and to live the way that they should be able to live with hopes of growth, because we ourselves are placing roadblocks in the path of progress in the United States. And where Trump, I think, is morally bad for the country's soul is that he has taken this truth and he has exported it and said, the problem is not us. We don't need to fix our education. I mean, he's for it. I'm not saying he's not. But it's not that we have all these things that we need to fix here. He does say that, and he says Democrats are communists and it's all terrible and we need to stop them. But this message is a complete contradiction of that. It is, the real problem in the world is that everybody else in the world is screwing us. And, we have the largest economy in the world. We're the richest country in the world. We are supporting 333 million people with a per capita income over $70,000 a year. And there is something depraved about looking at a planet in this condition and this country in this condition and saying everyone else is being unfair to us. Like, we don't have to think that, we owe the world things, which a lot of Democrats, unfortunately, I think, and liberals have come to. Not that we're helping the world in order to help ourselves, but that we owe the world things because we're so mean. But you also can't just say, the problem is them, so I'm going to make, Madagascar pay a 70% tariff. Like, physician, if you're going to talk about medicine, heal thyself. This is not healing. You don't heal, you don't heal somebody by shooting the person with COVID who might get you. You try to figure out how to cure the person with COVID or keep yourself from getting COVID or something like that. It is a very serious problem. And I don't think I think in message terms, you can see the potency of it. But unless it works, which again, I don't think it can, it's actually the moral rebalancing we need is something away from this horseshoe idea that the problem is that we're bad. Either we're bad because
or that we're also always it's a victim. There's a victimhood strain in much of that too, which I think is very satisfying in the near term, but as you say, potentially damaging in the long term.
Yeah, it's classic populism.
Yeah,
and so this is playing out. Just one note on the geopolitics. The post-World War II world was built on an alliance structure. And the view by the foreign policy establishment in both parties that allies were force multipliers, first in our conflict with the Soviet Union and then in the post-Cold War era as ways in order to lead and maintain the liberal international order, so-called. And Trump clearly disagrees with all this. And allies to him is a nebulous concept. And so I think one geopolitical problem with the tariff plan is that it really doesn't distinguish on the basis of friend or foe. That there's one exception. The UK got off relatively easily. It's just the base 10%. And of course, we have a long-standing relationship. Israel and Australia, they got higher tariffs, right? Those are our allies. Canada, Mexico, those tariffs have been kind of suspended. The looming tariffs have been suspended because of USMCA thing. But then Japan, our most important ally, especially in the most critical region of the world, got hit hard. even Vietnam, which had kind of become the new base of low-cost manufacturing for export to the United States after the first Trump round of tariffs and Trump won, they got slammed. And I was joking last week about Cambodia and Laos. They also got slammed, but they were also places where industrials moved manufacturing in order to escape the China tariffs. Well, Vietnam, sure, they're sending us a lot of Nikes, but they were also critical to our anti-China strategy. Not fans of China, the Vietnamese. That relationship is jeopardized now. So I think I can look at the politics of this, and as people have heard, I can see some rationales behind it. But where maybe I'm most concerned is the geopolitics and a world where the alliance system kind of crashes is not a safer world. It's just not.
I think, right. I think that's very deep. And by the way, there is one possibility, never a dull day with the Dodgers, as they used to say before I was born, and so Bibi Netanyahu is at the White House, I think, as we speak, or will be at the White House.
Well, the Dodgers are actually going to be there as we speak.
The Dodgers,
yeah, and then
Bibi
comes in the afternoon.
Never a dull day with them because I think they're 10-1 or something like that. Anyway,
I think they lost 2. I think.
Oh, did they? Okay, but the Dodgers are having a hell of a season, so this is a good day to be the Dodgers. But however you want to slice it, Bibi's coming to the White House, and there's this idea that he's coming to talk about tariffs. And I think a lot of people don't understand that he's probably not there to talk about tariffs. Weird stuff is going on. Not weird, but like there is complicated stuff going on in the Middle East, in the global geopolitical map going on. Odd news out of Iran about earthquake eruptions near nuclear facilities. As we mentioned last week, movement of American bombers to Diego Garcia, meaning they are potentially prepositioned to do some stuff. Israel moving on Gaza and Lebanon simultaneously, and in the West Bank simultaneously, and Iran making noises, fearful noises about trouble. And this meeting at the White House may have something to do with Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iran, and you're going to get the famous wag the dog talk, which is Trump will only do this. Now maybe Trump will do Iran because he wants to wag the dog and change the subject from the tariffs or something like that. Wagging the Dog, of course, a movie from 1998 where a war is invented that doesn't even exist. Written by David Mamet. A war is invented in order to distract the American attention from a White House political scandal. But as I once wrote in 2002, when people started talking about how Bush's Iraq strategy was wag the dog, I wrote a column that got that for the momentarily sort of right-wingish Josh Marshall of Talking Points memo, who was a hawk on Iraq, like very mad at me. I said, okay, good, go wag the dog as long as it means that we invade Iraq. Yes, I said it. You can come at me if you want to. It's fine. I don't care. And I'm going to say it again. If what we need to get the United States to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities and its oil exporting platforms in conjunction with Israel is to have Trump wag the dog, I am all for it. Wag that dog. That's what I'm saying, because that would be the most positive event in foreign policy in the last 15 years, and I would be very much I'm all in.
Are you prepared to make Wag the Dog your recommendation for April 7th, 2025?
I don't like the movie.
Yeah, I didn't think that. I don't really like it either.
I don't like it, but it, as a term, it has, of course, great resonance, and it's. Do
we have an alternative recommendation?
Do I have an alternative recommendation?
Does anyone on the?
I have a. Go ahead, Abe. Abe has something. Hey, no, you don't. Well, Abe had 20 minutes of a recommendation, and then he decided that I was right, and the thing that he was praising was wrong.
That's true.
He went to the Criterion Collection has a has a series of movies that it is made available in a sort of festival format, as it will if you subscribe to it, called Fun City, which are these movies about New York in the 1970s that show New York and all
And
of
60s, starting late
60s
'60s.
and all of its horror, like the horror of as New York was degrading and declining. And he watched a movie called The Angel Levine with Harry Belafonte and Zero Mostel, based on a Bernard Malamud short story that, Abe, you were thrilled to discover, did not know this, had originally been published in commentary.
Yeah.
The Angel
So,
Levine, it's a
so
story about,
that informed my enthusiasm for it as I was
right,
watching
yeah,
it, but then it couldn't sustain it.
yeah. Well, so when he emailed, said, "I love it," and I was like, "Really?" As I recall, it's unwatchable, and I think it does end up being completely insane and unwatchable. It's a fable story about an old Jewish man who is met by an angel, and the angel Levine is black. And how does he deal with the fact that this angel has black skin? I mean, that is
Angel's black and Jewish. It's a I'll say this much: it is a very surreal way of approaching like black Jewish relations in New York in the late '60s.
Yes, it is. But the story is a fable, which is what Malamud stories are, and the movie is a kind of, you are there with there's like psychedelics and this, and anyway, it's but I thought that's where you're going. But anyway, Fun City has some great stuff in it, including the Taking of Pelham 123, the single best movie ever made about New York,
movies,
and the French Connection, and Bye Bye Braverman, another actually a movie about commentary, oddly enough, based on a novel called To an Early Grave, which is about the death of the writer Isaac Rosenfeld, and four guys who go to the funeral of this writer Isaac Rosenfeld and get lost on their way to the funeral.
That's available on this.
That is in
on
that's
the
part
Criterion
of Fun
channel.
City.
I might try
The
that.
package is great. Yeah.
It is great, but so we're not
recommend the Criterion channel.
we're recommending
Fun
City on the
City.
Criterion
Fun
channel.
City
Mileage
on the
may
Criterion.
vary, but
This is one of those things you can do where if you go to Prime and you select the Criterion channel, you can subscribe for a week, watch everything, and then cancel it before the week is over, as long as you remember to cancel it. So I'm now teaching you a life hack for the Criterion channel, or any mini series on one of those networks that you don't actually want to subscribe to, if you're willing to surrender your week to it. So there we go. Recommendation was made. We'll be back tomorrow. For Christine, Matt, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.